networks of real world nature or have certain exponential drop of characteristics and so on. So these are known. And so generally one looks at this exponential drop off factor like gamma. So in this case it turns out to be around that, and usually it is small. That is the degree distribution, number of vertices having a certain degree. So plot against the degree vertices, it quickly drops out. There are large number of small degree vertices, a small number of large degree vertices. This is the usual inverse stuff. Anyway, that's a starting point for natural network. This is manifest in many natural engineering, physical systems, and so on. Okay, nothing great about it. But then what happens is there are a combination of factors: the degree distribution, the cluster coefficient, some things about path densities, some things about what are called centrality measures. Every graph has something called center set and based on distances, distances are based on status paths, and so on. So the degree distribution and various other aggregate properties like diameter, some of these diameter, radius, all defined with respect to shortest paths and so on. So these are all, and all together have certain behavior, and generally these are connections. So there's diameter means the maximum or all shortest paths distances between every pair of vertices is the diameter, something like diameter. And so it's small, usually small in such things. Clustering coefficient. So you start off with, but then what you do is you ask to do now this is a concept association and traversal. So this is purely an experimental thing to study, worthy of study. Meaning, what do you do? Suppose I say it's one thing to say whatever you think of based on the electricity of what the graph. Now you have a task, which is like say you go from coffee to Tintin or something like that. You flash two words from coffee to Tintin, and you say you get some words so that you can reach there by whatever comes to your mind. Now there are two situations where the graph is inside what we call, you have an internal representation, you have an internal relationships cast into some encodings and so on. You access that and quickly figure out certain things. And
can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So the length of the connectors, do they have any particular relation? Like, for example, milk and cheese has a longer gap in between than, for example, mouse and cat.
Length of what has what?
The length of the connectors.
Oh no, sorry. In this case it doesn't. Later on,
all edges are equal.
All edges are equal. There are situations where you talk about weighted thing. In fact, when you track eyes, when you perform a duty on reading, which is what you're doing, there you put weighted things.
Also, could you explain what is degree?
Degree is the number of vertices incident on number of vertices incident on a vertex. That's, and then you have all these graph theoretic things about quibbling about in degree and out degree if it's a directed graph. So, for example, milk has degree. So, what is the which looks to you like a large degree? This cat. Sort of cat seems to immediately evoke so many relationships. So it has one growth in this graph. It's got 5. Dog, something like very obvious, very familiar. So.
Is there a degree lexicon for so essentially, it would be interesting to find out whether if you take the concepts in English or any language, if there are patterns of how certain themes. So I'm guessing that natural entities like cat and dog typically would be very high degree.
Yeah, I think there are some studies. Maybe these are useful studies. There are what are called lexical categorizations in thesaurus, just based on some relationships. Some of you know WordNet. Nouns particularly have this superset, subset, and whole set, subset kind of thing. Something. This is a computer. Computer is calculating stuff and so on. And then this computer has this. So either has. So these are called so respectively the superset relationship or a hypernym. So nouns have all this very definite stuff. Now there are some lexical relationships which Thesauri, if you go and look, particularly Rogers is remarkable right now. There are only 1,000 categories, and these are up to 20th century thing. 1,000 of everything in the universe. Okay. Those 1,000 have some subcategories and so on, words and all that thing. So essentially, like what you said, things to do with dwelling, things to do with eating, things to do with living objects, whatever you use daily, they all have this high usage patterns. Think usage as a concept, so this will be reflected in your living. Of course, in writing text and these things, it will depend on channel, but essentially dog, cat, animals, pets will probably be closer. Maybe house, food, everything will come. So, but these thesaurus have also categories which are dominant like that. Words for dwelling at a top level, the subtree when you go up, a huge number collection, maybe a few thousand categories similar to that. Okay, now anyway, some of the messages will appear, some of the points, but then I won't do justice to more detail. But essentially, in this kind of study or an experiment, which is similar to many such of the same nature, you are asked what is called as a navigate from one thing to another. Now, this navigation is free association or guided. So, this can apply to spatial navigation, mental navigation of word. So, for example, say from NIAS you go to IIM. Many of our friends who visit IISc sometimes get confused and go to land up in IIM and then take hours to come later to IISc. So, but then how do you go from here? So, even for uninitiate, some standard algorithms humans use. The question is, what is it you strategize? And one of these is to learn that and then unforced is you just give 2 words and go from this, measure the length of the paths, measure it across the people, all those things unforced. Guided means you give the graph a neighborhood, you flash and you pick one of them. So I say you go from coffee to Tintin, you flash, but then you show only neighbors of coffee, milk and sugar, you choose. Now you choose milk. Then after milk, you get the neighbors of milk, cheese cat and that's it. So you choose one of them. So this is called a guided experiment, and this can apply to certain other situations. So you can do this kind of experiment to figure out essentially what we want to hypothesize and state at the end is humans generally have a way of reaching from somewhere very quickly. Now usually scientifically you compare them with 3 situations when you do that. So there's a very human way of doing it. So the length of the patch is probably a measure of that. There's an algorithmic, efficient algorithmic way of doing it. We call it the shortest path algorithms, which are computer science people have taught. There's a greedy strategy of choosing something which is the neighbor, which is more likely to have the largest degree and so on and so forth. There's a random graph way of doing it. Given a graph, a random algorithm will be choose a coin. There are 3 neighbors, 1/3 probability it will choose one of them. Next one, after choosing, it has 7 neighbors, 1/7 probability it will choose one of them. So this is the random traversal. So generally, scientifically speaking, all this network studies we do this, we study a particular way of doing it. Then what we think is the best way of doing it, and then a random way of doing it. And then you compare all these results. So I've not presented the results, and then essentially it will say that on an average, the humans tend to choose something between shortest path algorithms and as opposed to random algorithms. So that means an average path length for this diameter 7 graph is about taken by all humans for all experiments, we say 5.5. The shortest path may be 3.5, the random may be about 7.5. Okay. Now, very probably at the prima facie, a very intuitive conclusion one might say. And this is the nature of such experiments and reporting. I'll just leave that, so that's just an idea. Essentially, navigation on networks is a very useful guidepost. So one other thing we did was actually surprisingly to us last year, it got a prize also in the cognitive science conference, and I just flashed this Sudarshan work, PhD work, and this is
Go to full screen mode.
Okay, now this is on a certain other network. This is not a concept network. Now this network I'll show you. This network now, this is a special network like a road network for a spatial navigation. Now we take some game like this. This is an interesting game. Of course, you know, immediately catch the attention of people. Of course, very old. Louis Carroll had invented this. So you flash two words, and the rules of this game are what's called as a single letter change. So the example is there. So start from three letter words. These are change one letter at a time, and then arrive at a given three letter word using valid English words or small letters. Three letters, you know, almost everybody knows every word. You go to 4 and 5, only even crossword people find some very interesting, absolutely new words and so on. But essentially assume that there are about 800, if you thought what 1,000 three-letter words make sense among all the 26 to the power of 3 words. And so you just say give boy and girl. One participant, this is the output of just one part. He says bay, bat, cat, car, par, and all that. Okay. And then another person may go somewhere else and reach there. Another one for par. Okay. Now this is different people do the same things, and then we have all these kinds of data coming out of all these 20 participants made to play 65 pairs of words, and now this is free. That is, you don't guide what are the labels. So the idea is you don't have the knowledge of the graph in this case. There is a graph underlying, which is of course you can take those 800 words, and generally these are sparse graphs. So generally large scale networks are sparse from graph theoretic point of view. Sparse it means if there are n vertices, if there are only, we can say order n, okay, order n among all the possible order n squared edges, there are only order n realize. So the 1 million vertex natural world, real world large scale graph will have only about, I think about 10 to 20 times the number of vertices, much less than that. Whereas the number of things is square of million, possible, a complete graph. So generally they are sparse. So that's what put these things with concept presentations are easier to probably track. Anyway, what do people do? Of course, initially, then you give, this depends on the graph. So these are depends on now what are called the centers of the graph. See, by something just take up some none and a bat or something you say. Might turn out they all pass through one vertex in between. Without it, the graph is not connected. So it depends on the nature of the structure of the underlying connectivity of the graph. And so these things which are crucial, they're called articulation points or centers. You know, you get an intuitive idea of center, which is that lots of things which are around have to pass through a certain set of vertices which are critical. Now, there's a technical definition for that. So, but essentially, if you give a certain word which have pair, which have to pass through some centers, like if you have to go through Majestic, there is no other way, and all of us will get stuck. But fortunately, this navigation may go from here to IM, you don't need that. But it might so happen, then those will take longer path length. Okay. But it depends on the density of such paths in that graph and so on. But nevertheless, many other things, the average time can vary. Now it can vary depending on the diameter and so on and so forth. And the whole idea of this is saying you learn. There is something in the beginning, it takes time. So there are 65 games, 65 pairs were given sort of. So as you can see, about up to 10 it takes some time, then the time reduces. Now that's okay. That's expected. But why it reduces and things like that, you want to give a rationale, which is based on something what we call a centrality measure that is defined there. C of V is the reciprocal of the sum of the distances between V and all the vertices in graph. For all new graph, V have to D is the shortest path distance, and all these are evaluated, and things depend on the CV and the V which falls between the pair of vertices given and so on. And those things you can compute and all that. Anyway, I don't want to elaborate the result of this. I quickly show one more situation. So I just want to say it's possible to do this experiment kind of thing, which is like
in the previous graph there was a minimum we were talking about. That minimum stands for what?
In the Yeah.
Yeah, these minima belongs to, what is the
Okay,
interest
now
of
let
this
me tell
individual?
you. Okay, now, okay, that depends on that centrality of the vertex. So day is very common. The word there, D-A-Y, day, is so common. Lots of things pass through that thing. Okay, so the whole idea is that if you learn, you hit something where lots of things pass through that. So if you want to go from NIAS to IIM, you think of just, okay, let me reach Majestic first at least, okay? Because I know that that terrestrial navigation, which is not this. So that's kind of, it will figure in what's called as the center of the graph. The center of the graph itself will be computed based on all test distances and the minimum of the maximum distances and so on. Those set of vertices will be the center. So the things around, some landmarks around. So these landmarks are learned. It's like you learn landmarks and then just keep it. Then so you sort of assume that everything you will go through day. Whatever you give, independently you will find. So that's probably the strategy we adopt. Is the idea we are trying to push. So these are, sometimes you go through that and sometimes there is only one. So in that case, that one minima, I don't know what it is called. Bid in this case. Okay, now I just close with one more paradigm. This is all, but one more paradigm I wanted to show you. Okay, now I'll close with this. It's a large ongoing program with us, which has all the trappings of all kinds of hard and essentially human questions at NLP. Okay, so this one example is about this project was on sentiment ratings, and it's one of the most popular stuff talked about in the entire machine learning community, lots of applications and so on and so forth. But anyway, it's wide open for analyzing, theorizing, analyzing, etc. And okay, the idea here is, see, there are something called polarity of words, census score, among census, the sentiment score, positive words, negative words, and then there's a gradation between them. Now the idea is that in the long quest for understanding the sentiment, mood, everything of something which is said, particularly in textual form, you need to work on something. So this is the starting point of our approach. The starting point was to look at all the crowdsourced information. And this is what I meant, there is a huge amount of data. So this is the first thing everybody does in the machine learning community, look at the huge corpus which are available from the Amazons, the Yahoos and Googles and so on. Thanks to them and generate a wealth of data. And of course, they may have more special access to this data, but modern researchers will have lesser access to some kinds. So we look at Amazon ratings of, say, book reviews, for example. So there is something, rating is given, some star, and then there is some write-up, okay, some blog and something. So the whole idea is to just correlate the rating with the blog, the write-up. Okay. So if you have some 5 positive adjectives in that description of a book, and then you give a 4, sounds okay. But you put some 10 positive adjectives and give a rating 1, then it is fishy. So similar things, there are lots of sub-issues, all that is what the idea is tackling. Now I just show what we did was, okay, now the whole idea is to not to trust the entire thing which is coming from that, obviously. Okay? So the whole idea is to look at cleaning up some pre-processing of all this data is required, the good fidelity stuff you take, meaningfully correlated with the words whose polar ratings are known with the star, what you wrote first. That could be a subset of all possible things which you may want to extend. Now that next part is the graph theoretic thing. So suppose for 100 words, beautiful, wonderful, all those things you will get there. Generally will correlate. Ugly, bad, lousy, all those things also will correlate. So the ratings are between 1 and 5. Since I won't have time, I won't run. I will just say 2 words and 1 and 5. 1 for the worst and 5 for the most positive. So you pick about 100 things which come out of these things by cleanup act. Now the rest of the 1,000 adjectives or something, there are 8,000 adjectives in WordNet, you propagate these scores, and that's the network theoretic model. So there is a network of relationships between adjectival words, whatever phrases. Okay? Now, of which for 100 we have a rating, which is based on a crowdsourced information, which we all will trust. Okay? Use that to propagate to the rest of the 1,000 other words. Okay? Based on the relationships they bear among themselves from word usage. So it seems to be a good starting point to analyze textual corpora. So anyway, there are the issues about and indications and not bad at all, and all kinds of double things, litotes and various adjectives, forms and things like that, and then you make some scores a little bit, and you go around. And then there are some weights and ratings based on which. Okay, now, so you have ratings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there are lots of words with different ratings which you select, and then you associate some by some standard base to this. But what we want to do is to propagate to all the other adjectives which we don't take from that. So essentially, now this will be a standard paradigm in all network analytics. That is, you have a large scale network and you have some reliable measure associated with some substructure. Maybe subset of vertices, maybe subset of edges or something. Next, somehow you want to carry it across this network. Now this is done in many sciences. It's usually called some kind of a belief propagation or machine learning company. You sort of propagate from one to the other based on the relationships in the network. You do some iterative things. This is often used in various situations like NLP parsing and so on. So this is what one instance of that application. So the relationships are termed. This is again standard corpora, standardized stuff by today in the world of research, that you use WordNet and then you have WordNet's relationships. WordNet. It deals only with nouns, adjectives, adverbs, and verbs. And also, in some sense, I'm not too satisfied with that, but we need to use thesauri, and we need to use phrase dictionaries, we need to use a lot of different things, which we somehow use. But it's a good starting point, because this is at least a standardized, accepted stuff in the research community. And there are lots of this thing called sets, synonym sets. And you use those relationships in the graph of WordNet. And I think somewhere that graph of WordNet is there. This is JJ is for adjective. JJ is the pen tree bank notation for adjectives. JJ WordNet network relationships. It looks like that. In the fact that there are lots of adjectives there. Obstinate, something related. And those things are marked based on the set counts normalized over something, then you put distances. So here is where you use some weights and things like that. Okay, so based on all these things, you can do some work, and essentially we are saying that you use to WordNet to process these things. I think I'll stop here. It's just there is something on scan path data analysis and all that. That's I leave it aside. In fact, one of my proposals, and I think Rajesh and others dealing with people in schools and other things, endorse, is that we want to try experiments with corpora data you can process, okay, to get lots of probabilistic information, which are used as handles to analyze. Meaning, how often does a noun phrase look like, adjective noun, or noun, adjective noun, which are more predominant and things like that. Okay? So all these kinds of information are gathered from various corpora. But somehow, when we process, we have certain strategies which are very maybe let's say quite diffuse. But it's good to use the information measured from an eye tracker study. And I will tell you a simplest instance. And we all encounter this. When you type, you make mistakes, and spell check will obviously listen. So, for example, he was dressed in a formal manner, and he was dressed in a normal manner. F you type N. It looks so nice and wonderful. Meaning itself gets probably slightly changed. Now the idea is. there is something about formal manner and a normal manner corpus-based probabilities. Probably use these kinds of things to resolve in the NLP semantic stage. But humans, very quickly, from the context you do a lot of things. So we pick the contextual information from the way you quickly pick things when you read things. And as you pointed out, reciprocal of the time you take to read is the proportional to the probability of that being the common usage. Okay? So what you want to do is to entire corpus data produced by human as a textual corpus, you can analyze statistics. But you can sit with humans, put a lot of experimental data and see how they react, get the timing, all those things, get the probabilities. Now we have to check a lot of things. So this is the stage we are in. Thank you. Do we have any discussion questions? Yeah, here is not here. Yeah.
There's a network just a couple of slides ago,
Yeah.
and it shows that there's certain centrality of certain words, right?
Yeah.
So I was just a bit of confused. So these words are central because of their usage per se, or the way those words possibly have been like that from the usage point of view. I mean,
Yeah. See, since said there is a central parameter in WordNet data. It's called the synonym set. So in thesaurus also, you'll have things like live, love. Love will have about 100 synonyms, okay, in thesaurus. So similarly, some of the nouns like car or something will have so many relationships, which is superset and subset. That count is used as a weighting factor in this graph.
right.
Now you are asking whether it is usage or what it.
I mean, what kind of phenomena, but say in some sense, a biological phenomena or the property which is making it the central.
Usage, not biological, it's a usage.
So usage meaning like say maybe cultural. So like culturally, in one particular culture, people just learn to use those words more than other words. Is it like that?
No, it is based on corpus. See, presently the accepted research word would be, in fact, that's another problem. When you do experiment, you have to work according to certain set standards by people. They will say ANC corpus, BNC corpus, Z corpus, based on this, it gains credibility. So essentially all the things which have been written up in English, accordingly to genre or whatever is required, is classified. WordNet is produced it, and that is human produced. So you have to give credence to the fact that most people use them.
Would that be different if you had oral rather than written corpora?
Yeah, very much. But you know, oral corpora analysis will be very much, but then the noise. Yes. But in fact, I guess maybe when you want to analyze the higher aspects of human processing, which have to do with metaphors and mirth and jokes and fun and alternatives, double meanings and all kinds of things. There are these mixers. Usage in phonetic, the phonemic representation, the morphemic representation of words, you can play with to get those things. And that will vary with culture. What may be a joke here may not be a joke there, and things like that. Yeah.
Question about that Amazon review database that you had. So do you have access to the timestamps on when the reviews were written?
Yeah, I believe, yeah.
Because I wonder if we can use these techniques to find out what makes a good review. So I don't mean what other people are rating your review as. That of course is already there. But so suppose who has the most influential reviews? Meaning that once I write a review, whether it is negative or positive, it's more likely that other people will write reviews that are negative or positive. So that is to say that my review is more likely to have an influence on other readers and reviewers than yours. Can we get to that?
Yeah. But how do you get to that from the timestamp? We don't know the.
Meaning,
It doesn't
suppose
say.
that I wrote a review on 17 January.
So whatever follows you are saying could
So
be
is there a
biased.
shift in the register of the review? So whether it shifts upwards to more stars or downwards to fewer stars as a result of my review, and then look at the content of my review to see whether it's the wording, what is it that makes an influential review.
But for that, you also need to the information, the visitation, right? How many people are reading your review? How do you get that?
You have some data on how many clicks you have on who's reading which review. That's not the issue.
I think you have stars. If you accept to review someone writes, you can upload them.
No, I'm
my
saying.
point is
No,
that
but
it's-
does it that it's not going to be diminish the importance of whether it is by the influence of that
Right.
that or by independent.
So that's what I'm saying. Is there a way to get to that influence question, which is the real? That's what Amazon should be ideally interested in, right? It's who is the influential reviewer.
See, one thing is, if it is done in usual network analysis, you have a then of course these two reviews have to be somehow adjust, the relationship has to be cast to the network, then you can remove certain things, and that kind of dynamics continues. You remove a leader or remove a thought influence or something, then whether the whole thing falls apart or it is still homogeneous, cohesive, it's like that, probably you can study, once you have the network, but in this case,
But that could be a little bit because
the network relationship will be precise. That's what, if he clicks on that, we will take it, yes, read it, that's what, and then put a line.
But what I mean is that in all many kinds of media situations, whether blogging or news articles and whatnot,
Yeah,
you want to make sure that your output has the maximal influence, right? And that's not can't be measured just by click-throughs or things which are direct media,
Okay.
right? So, for example, if you're looking at sentiment analysis, you should be able to tell me what is the impact of this particular article on the sentiment that is then expressed on that issue.
okay, I think it should be, it's possible to study now. I think you should, some other evolutionary linguistics or something you might also want to do that. What words, of course, if you had the corpus for last 100 years, at least you may have, but things, words and phrases and usages which have changed over a period of time. We gathered from the statistics of their simple statistics. Similar study, yeah, I think it's useful.
That's there, isn't it? Isn't there a database of, I was reading the Chronicle some time ago, a database of all the written exits over the last
That's, there's,
however
the
many years.
interesting thing is it's so huge, again, the Google
Google Ngram.
Google Ngram data over the last several years. In fact, that is one thing they say might be useful for this. So huge.
So actually, what might be interesting is to draw from Google Ngram Viewer and plug it into Amazon reviews and see if you can produce the best review as a result of that.
And any 3D digital lexicons are available in terms of this RS form?
But that is the starting point, and then the people who have built glosses and some hobby, entry banks, they all have. They had 1,000 words now, some used for crossword. I have some cheap trick devices for crossword plays. See the crosswords and this, we can make a machine solve a complete crossword.
Scrabble.
Scrabble.
The experiment where you said
Scrabble
that,
at least easy, I will talk about the cryptic crossword.
Yeah, that's true.
the experiment where you said that the subjects were given one word and were asked to go to another word, and the graph shows that for the 10 puzzles maybe there is a learning phase and then it gets stable. I was just wondering, and you mentioned that people remember landmarks
Yeah.
as words. So I was just wondering that isn't it more of a test of spatial cognitive abilities than lexical cognitive abilities? Because I mean, you
No, the words themselves may not be spatially associated in that case.
not words, but the way that we are trying to go from one word to another word, understanding landmarks, is exactly how we navigate.
Yeah, but so what we call is we learn the network structure, not the nothing to do special. What this is, and I think this is written up in different words and different corporate words. You learn the network. A priori, you don't know. Special was something, somebody tells you here, you go to Malleswaram or something. This is learning, telling you. Now here you learn the network by repeated experiments. So that's all.
I think, but there's a way to control for that, which is that if you look at a group which is just asked to produce that, whatever the path, freely, versus another group which is given more spatial, so maybe they are allowed to draw on a piece of paper or something like that. It might be interesting to see if the latter group is much faster, in which case your hypothesis would have some validity. But if it doesn't make any difference, then the idea would be that it's purely
Okay, okay. If it's a very small thing you're saying, you might remember the special
So
pattern.
I mean,
No, the
Yeah,
networks
basic
might be
question-
overlapping,
basic
right?
question is how a person do the association when the person learns. Can we figure it out?
No, at large it should be based on the conditional probability of how often you have seen it, and you know.
so but that is your hypothesis. She's wondering whether you are actually testing for spatial reasoning rather than for word reasoning.
Okay.
And also to allow people to watch what the other person's path is, as in you're not giving them idea about the neighborhood, but if one person is allowed to observe, then I think as the number of people increase, I think the shortest path will come automatically. I'm just thinking in terms of ad colony optimization. If the same path covers multiple times, so if the first person is allowed to, if subsequent people are allowed to watch the reasoning of the people before them, then will they be able to? They obviously be able to do it faster.
There's some recent work at Stanford, right, which shows that ants are essentially optimal.
Their paths are.
One other reason we are not, we didn't address this, but the thing that intrinsic algorithmic difference between a shortest path algorithm or something you program, and then what you do, you must learn the centers and jump, is written up in one of those papers or something. There is something you go to the center out, right? But center is not one. I mean, the center is a collection of vertices and active. So from there you can jump to something else. Okay? So you get out of it, but sometimes you don't get out of it, or you may stay there and all that. So the act of getting out and going to the thing, we have measured out the path chosen. What is the degree distribution of the vertices which are chosen in the path? So you study that. So essentially saying, somehow, is there a pattern to the something like a reducing very small shortest path thing? You generally do that. You will pick some. Somehow you pick not too many degrees of freedom. So at this point you are there. You can pick 3 vertex neighborhood, one of them, and somehow from those, actually you pick is the one which is the next one has only a small number of neighborhood, so that you don't get arbitrarily, get lost. That's the idea. That's why I do this. So and that kind of thing. Okay.
Thank you.
One question. When we are talking about the data from Amazon, there are people who write reviews for money. There are paid reviews, and it is for many things they write reviews. That might not be true. So when you were using the data, did you have any means of filtering out?
No,
kind of reviews?
no, I suspect all that. See, one of the practices we all, that's why I think this kind of crowdsourcing, data gathering is all part of the big data science. I have a connection now, I'm doing my student, you should do. I have something called catchyphrases.master. I create my machine. And for example, the phrase I'm using,
They would use a lot of adjectives or something.
whatever comes in the newspapers and so on. See, this is the corpus I built. Interesting phrases for me. Similarly, reviews which come in newspapers or something interesting. Extremely scathing reviews or extremely glowing reviews, and these are very telling. The way, because they have no guided. So essentially, it's true. A large sourced information base is required for machine processing statistically. It's on Google and all that. But it's also crowdsourced and it's a lot of fraught with noise. Whereas a carefully written, orchestrated review by a published thing, I get this paper, something is worse. So I have to collect that. Say, if I want to measure the probabilities of this budget deficit, fiscal deficit, attention deficit, and the latest I read, trust deficit, it comes in the papers now, of which the first few are so often. But the attention deficit, maybe some of us in this world might know. We don't even see attention deficit in other than talking about attention deficit abilities. But trust deficit is essentially a newspaper introduced term in the last few years, and it's a very important new thing. So in a whole corpus, this probability of that will be low, but then the idea is to get it from various corpus which are more authenticated. There's no other substitute for that. Otherwise, you will not predict. Okay.
Thank you.
That's all.
Right. Next talk, I'll try to finish. I'm getting a little bit behind schedule. So, what I'm going to talk about today is really why for a very long time, I didn't work on social networks. I worked on social networks well before they became the thing to study in 1998 actually. So no Facebook, no MySpace, nothing. And in fact, I wrote a paper which was probably in the first 5 or 6 papers written on the topic. And it generated a lot of citations. I never published it actually, it was only on the archive. So it's interesting, it only exists on networks, it doesn't exist in paper. It's got at least a few hundred citations as far as I can tell. But I thought that was a boring field. And so I didn't do it. And I'll try to explain why I thought it was a boring field and what we can do to what I think is more interesting now and therefore is worth revisiting social networks, at least from a academic's perspective. And a lot of that has to do with things like digital humanities, stuff that's happening now which was not happening in 1998. So I know that there's a lot of money to be made in analyzing just graphs and links and stuff like that. But I think that in terms of understanding really difficult intellectual questions about how ideas and beliefs get propagated, there is much that remains to be done just in thinking about how to understand social networks. So let me start with a picture. So I'm going to just do this for one particular social network. It's not a big data network. It's a pretty small data network by social network standards, but it will give you a sense for what kind of questions there arise. So this is an interesting, let's see if we can find ourselves some pointers on that. So some of these names might be familiar to some of you, right? So this is really a network of philosophers. These are all sort of ancient Western philosophers, starting from Plato, who are, of course, some of very well-known names. And so this was a social network that, I forgot the name of the person, but this was derived from Wikipedia. So basically what they did was scrape Wikipedia for references to philosophers and derive the importance of a particular philosopher on the basis of how many times they've been cited and cross-cited and so on and so forth. Right, so you can see it's a very interesting network.
Sorry, can we switch off those lights? Then maybe it will be more.
This is just a piece of it.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can.
Sorry.
How about that?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Not for me though.
So if you take a look at it, all this has done is to take the cross linkages between the various so-called ancient Greek and to medieval period Western philosophers and visualized it. That's all this is. Right? You can see that Aristotle is the biggest. So the size, so it's a very interesting visualization, right? So the size of the dot is proportional to how often, how densely connected they are. And so in that sense, from a visualization perspective, it's a very well done one. You have Plato, you have Descartes, Leibniz, this is Spinoza right at that corner. It tells you so therefore some very big names. Now, therefore you could argue that if you want to understand how intellectual history works, Why not? Why not just create Wikipedia and find out who's important rather than read the history of philosophy? How many of you have read Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy? Maybe a few people. Everybody else should definitely read it. What's interesting in this graph is really what's not there. Right? Number one, so can you tell me the single biggest thing that's not there? Yes, Socrates is not there. Right? So Plato is there, Aristotle is there, no Socrates. Okay? Partly because Socrates didn't write anything, and so when people are citing, you can't cite Socrates. Okay? Some other problems. You'll notice that Leo Strauss is over there, very big. Leo Strauss died 25 years, 10 or so, 25 years ago. He's not an ancient Greek philosopher. He actually was Paul Wolfowitz's PhD advisor at Chicago. So one of the most famous modern conservative political philosophers. Right? So you can see that Leo Strauss, just by the dint of being influential in certain circles, gets almost, in fact, a lot more prominence than Machiavelli, Plotinus, Augustine, who are actually, in any sense, far, far more influential philosophers. Right? Let's see some other problems here. You see Eric Voegelin, who's not even Leo Strauss, meaning Eric Voegelin is kind of Ayn Randish figure. So unless you belong to certain cultish corners of modern libertarian philosophy, you will not read Eric Voegelin. Then you have Duns, Scotus, Joseph. So these are all like, so many of the big names are simply not here. No Aquinas, notice.
What are the different colors?
I am not fully sure. I think that the colors might have to do with timing, but I'm not fully sure. Right? I just this was I'm using it for illustrative purposes rather than telling you what the visualization is of this. Now contrast this with a diagram from a very interesting book. It's called The Sociology of Philosophies, and it's by a sociologist called Randall Collins. If anybody wants to read it, just let me know. I'll send you the PDF. It's a very fantastic book because it's a comparative sociology of philosophies across cultures. So there are ancient Greek philosophers, Indian, Chinese, modern Western philosophers, everybody in it. Right? So it's a very, and again, it's a network analysis. It's not a non-network analysis. But what he's doing here is pointing out the relations which are far more personal between the philosophers. So you can see that if you look at the links, right, you may not be able to see the legend at the bottom, but the arrows are driven by conflict, by pedagogical relations. So if I taught you, then you have one kind of arrow and so on. So Socrates, for example, teaches Plato. He also teaches Xenophon, who's not mentioned here. Plato, of course, teaches Aristotle. Right? Aristotle teaches Theophrastus, so on and so forth. Okay, so what it tells you is, again, that if you take the big names, so in any account of Aristotelian or Platonic philosophy, again going back to the previous slide for a second, Plotinus and Plato are the two really big figures in Platonism, in the ancient era, not in the modern era. Okay? And Aristotle and Theophrastus are the big names in Aristotelian philosophy in the ancient era. Theophrastus' commentary on Aristotle is the great ancient commentary on Aristotle. Which is totally obvious here, because somebody who's an intellectual historian